In 1883, a new children's book appeared in Italy. This wonderful tale was made into a movie by Walt Disney in 1940 and has become a classic. The movie was called Pinocchio. It is the tale of a little wooden puppet who wanted so badly to become a real boy, but he was lacking in one thing. He didn't have a conscience. So a little cricket came his way and became his conscience. That little critter we know by the name of Jiminy Cricket. He was there to show him the difference between right and wrong. The Blue Fairy tells Pinocchio, "You must learn to choose between right and wrong." Pinocchio says, "Right and wrong? How will I know?" Says the Blue Fairy, "Your conscience will tell you." Confused, Pinocchio asks, "What are conscience?" Jiminy Cricket pops in and says, "What are conscience? Let me tell ya, a conscience is that still small voice that people won't listen to. That's just the trouble with the world today." Pinocchio asked Jiminy, "Are you my conscience?" The Blue Fairy touches Jiminy Cricket with her magic wand, saying, "I dub you Pinocchio's conscience, Lord High Keeper of the knowledge of right and wrong, counselor in moments of high temptation, and guide on the straight and narrow path." And sure enough, that little cricket becomes a voice of conscience to Pinocchio. Every time Pinocchio has to decide whether something is right or wrong, he calls on Jiminy Cricket, and we see that Jiminy's judgments are always correct. He sings a little song and tells Pinocchio, "When you get in trouble and you don't know right from wrong, give it a little whistle, give it a little whistle. When you meet temptation and the urge is very strong, give it a little whistle, give it a little whistle. Take the straight and narrow path, and when you start to slide, give it a little whistle, give it a little whistle. And always let your conscience be your guide." Jiminy Cricket becomes Pinocchio's constant companion, that insistent voice telling him the difference between right and wrong. By the end of the story, Pinocchio indeed becomes a real boy. Wouldn't it be nice if we also had a conscience, a cricket that spoke to us? But we do. Each of us has that same conscience inside us, that voice of God speaking to us, that voice of which Jesus speaks when he says, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me." We all have a conscience telling us the difference between right and wrong. The great psychologist Carl Jung used to call the conscience that still small voice telling us that something is out of tune. George Washington called the conscience that little spark of the celestial fire. But the great French novelist Victor Hugo got it most correct when he said, "The conscience is God in the human being." A conscience is very important. Most of us were told about it by our mothers. When I couldn't sleep at night, my mother used to say, "Your conscience must be bothering you." Of course, when she couldn't sleep, it was indigestion. We have the little voice of God inside of us. Now there are many other voices inside us too. There's the voice of pride. There's the voice of selfishness. There's the voice of prejudice, the voice of ambition, the voice of greed. There is the lesser voice of lesser authority, of law, of state and church. All these voices are crying out to us to be heard. All these voices are clamoring to be followed. But in the end, it is this supreme guide, this still small voice, this little spark of the celestial fire, this voice of God inside us, which we must follow if we hope to achieve any inner peace. Sometimes we think we are following our conscience, when in reality it's our pride we are listening to, or perhaps our ambition, or our prejudice. We often mistake a short memory for a clear conscience. But when we are truly in touch with that little voice of the Good Shepherd inside of us, then we are on the right path. A path which may well be different for you and for me. Traditional Catholic morality has always taught that the supreme guide, the supreme law, which must at all times be followed, is our own individual conscience. St. Thomas Aquinas said that every judgment of conscience is obligatory, and the one who goes against conscience always commits a sin. Cardinal Newman, now St. John Henry Newman, was the great theologian of conscience. So much did he leave his mark on theology that when the Second Vatican Council was convened, Pope Paul VI called it Newman's Hour. Cardinal Newman wrote extensively on the conscience and said that the one who does not follow his own conscience loses his soul. He spent the first half of his adult years as an Anglican scholar at Oxford University, then followed his own conscience and was led into the fold of the Roman Catholic Church, where he spent the second half of his adult life as a Catholic priest, still writing prodigiously. His writings were being condemned by the Vatican, where one Monsignor called him the most dangerous man in England, and insisted that he be crushed. But then a marvelous new pope took over, Leo XIII, who recognized John Henry Newman's great gifts and made him a cardinal, though he was nearly 80 years old. Cardinal Newman used to say that if he were asked to give a toast to the Pope, he would say, "Oh yes, I will toast the Pope, but I will toast conscience first." This was no new theology. This has always been our teaching. The supreme authority, the supreme law, is that little voice of God inside us. Joseph Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict XVI, wrote, "Above the authority of the Church, above the teaching of the Pope, always stands one's own individual conscience, which must at all times be followed, even if it goes against the authority of the Church." This conscience, this still small voice inside us, is what in extraordinary times caused extraordinary people to do extraordinary deeds. It was the voice of conscience that called Joan of Arc to defy the law and choose a heroic life and a heroic death. The voice of conscience that called Thomas More to the same. It was the voice of conscience that drove a young German officer, Klaus von Stauffenberg, to defy the army he was serving and to give his life in an attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler, whom he had come to see as the consummate evil. In times of doubt, in times of inner turmoil, turn to that supreme guide, that supreme law, the Lord High Keeper of the knowledge of right and wrong, that counselor in moments of high temptation, that guide on the straight and narrow path, that still small voice hailed by St. Thomas Aquinas, hailed by St. John Henry Newman, hailed by Pope Benedict, and hailed by that wise prophet, Jiminy Cricket. Give a little whistle, and always let your conscience be your guide.